Chapter 16, The Marketplace. We drove long into the night without stopping. I was afraid to close my eyes even for an instant for fear of seeing the face of the witch, Catalina. Even with my eyes open, I could not get her visage out of my mind. She had worked herself into my thoughts and had gotten a foothold there, as if she had left her energy inside me, or had removed something of mine that was vital for my well-being. I was certain she was doing witchcraft on the level of the invisible, and all my efforts went to fighting an exhausting battle of the will. Carlos was right, she was pursuing us, and I had a gnawing anxiety that if I fell asleep, something terrible would happen. For an instant my eyes drooped, and in my drowsy state, the smudges of dirt and light reflected on the windshield became the awesome face of Catalina with large teeth and glowing eyes. The trees outside were her black hair flowing like a banshee. I shook my head to dispel her image, yet I couldn't help being obsessed with what had happened. Now her face was burned into my memory forever, like a flame after staring at it too long. I felt like a moth flying erratically around a light bulb, unable to break the fixation I had with that woman and her power. Also, I couldn't help worrying about the luminous worms that she had said were draining my energy. I thought I had gotten rid of all of them during the recapitulation I had done under Clara's guidance, but 7 years had not elapsed, and according to the sorcerers, that was the duration for luminous worms existing inside a woman's womb. All I could think of was that Catalina had awakened the luminous worms in my stomach by massaging it. I thought of the girl in the store who wanted to go to the United States with Carlos. I felt a pang of jealousy and hated myself for feeling that way. The witch, Catalina, had me pegged. In spite of my denying it, I was still attached to men, and being loved and accepted was prominent, despite anything I said or did to the contrary. I tried to think of other things, but the darkness around us was too engulfing. It seemed to be darker than a normal night. That worried me. I glanced over at Carlos, but he was as worried and preoccupied as I was. For distraction, I asked him to describe the kinship system of the Yaqui Indians, and whether they had the mother-in-law joking relationship pattern, predominant in so many other cultures. Is there mother-in-law avoidance among the Yaqui? I asked. Carlos looked at me as if I were a cockroach. I mean, according to Malinowski, based on his work in the Trobriand Islands, there is usually an avoidance structure set up between the husband and the wife's mother. Or is between the mother's brother and the sister's daughter. That would be an incest taboo since it would make him her uncle. It's better just to keep quiet, rather than to talk nonsense, Carlos said, turning his eyes back to the road. I felt a jolt. I knew he was angry with me because of the luminous worm. I felt like a traitor, guilty of still being energetically attached to men, that by now I didn't give a fig about. I had one foot in the world of sorcery, the other gangrenous one, was immersed in the world of human affairs. Upon more soul-searching, I realized I was still concerned with finding love, thinking of who will take care of me in times of need, and what will happen to me if I didn't succeed in the sorcerer's world. I was investing, expecting rewards for my efforts, and when no rewards were forthcoming, I tended to give up and revert back to my familiar pattern of behavior. As we drove in the dark, memories came back to haunt me. I couldn't believe they still had such a powerful emotional valence. I was certain Catalina had stirred up a can of worms during her treatment, and because of it, I could remember every detail of things that had taken place years ago. I was 14, banging on the church doors at 2 o'clock in the morning, wanting desperately to have a priest hear my confession. I couldn't take it any longer. I was afraid I would die in the night and be condemned to eternal hell for doing the things the tragic couple in Father O'Brien's Sunday sermon had done. That Sunday at Mass he had told us what had happened to 2 teenagers in his previous parish who had gone on a drive up the mountains to do shameful things. While they were engrossed in petting and kissing, and other things which he left deliberately vague, the handbrake had worked itself loose and the car rolled down the mountainside, killing the young people instantly. When their bodies were found, to the shock of their parents, they were in various states of undress. Father O'Brien had said that their death had come so suddenly that they didn't even have time to make an act of contrition, and now their souls are in perpetual agony. The doors of the church had been locked and no one came to hear my confession. I got tired of pounding and became so enraged that I swore that I would never expect anything from the church again. God had closed his heart to me in my hour of need, and I would do the same to him forever. I gave the thick wooden door a sound kick, spat on the ground, and because I was so agitated and needed to relieve myself, I squatted down and urinated right there on the church steps. I never went to confession again, and to my mother's profound distress, I decided to sleep late every Sunday and skip Mass altogether. When I recounted this event to Clara, she said that I was lucky that no priest had been there to open the church door. For to confess and throw oneself on the mercy of a priest or God himself, in a moment of weakness, was the worst thing anyone could do. She said that contrary to what I might have thought at the time, power had not deserted me after all, because by urinating on the church steps I broke my ties with the church forever. She had assured me that urinating is one of the best ways sorcerers have of severing their connections with things. I too had an awful time disassociating myself from the church, she had revealed. I used to look forward to Sunday Mass so I could meet with friends. Then I would go to their houses and eat and gossip all afternoon. That was the only enjoyment I had in my life, so I clung to it like there's no tomorrow. How did you break that habit? I asked. My teacher, the Nawal Julian, had me collect all my piss in jars for days. Then, late one night, I had to go to the church of my hometown, and when no one was around I had to fill all the holy water basins with urine and also the baptismal fount. Then I had to go up to the altar and fill the chalices and add some piss to the incense dispenser. Imagine the next morning, for he had me go on a Saturday, the surprise of the priest and parishioners when they blessed themselves with my piss. I didn't see the humor of it at the time, because I was frightened to death and felt guilty for years afterward over committing holy sacrilege, but the Nawal Julian said that that is exactly what we do, we try to bless ourselves and become holy using someone else's piss as if it were sacred. Years later I saw the irony of it and the touch of genius in the Nawal stalker's plan. You, on the other hand, had followed no plan, you simply went there to relieve yourself and the spirit took care of the rest, without you even knowing it. As we drove in an uneasy silence, I breathed in the memories and softly exhaled them. Several hours later we arrived at the city of Los Mochas. We stopped at a modern all-night diner to eat. I was ravenous. My legs were itching terribly out of guilt, tension, and lack of sleep. I almost wished I had not left Catalina's potion in her house. Yet I had been told never to accept food or drink from anyone, and certainly not medicine. Who could say what that lotion contained or might have done to me after La Catalina's wrathful outburst? We ordered bacon and eggs in the well-lit coffee shop. Carlos seemed tired, but I was relieved to see that he too was ravenous. Somehow, we still had our appetites, so things could not have been totally out of control. During the meal I kept reaching down to scratch my legs because my Levi's rubbed against the bites, making them itch all the more. I know a pharmacy in this town, Carlos said, noticing my discomfort. When they open in the morning, we'll go there. There is also a curer who works in the herb market. I couldn't believe my ears. Not another cure, I said adamantly. I simply refused to go. No, this is different, Carlos assured me. He's an herbalist. He has studied pharmacology and medicinal plants. He's very knowledgeable. Besides, it's a good idea to cancel out the powerful effect Catalina had on you. This was the first time since leaving Sonora that Carlos had mentioned the sorceress's name. I thought that perhaps we had put enough distance between us to neutralize the pull of her power. All right, if you think it's a good idea, I said, rubbing my calf against the table leg. How did La Catalina get to be so powerful? I asked. Every morning before dawn she walks 5 miles to a hilltop and stands there naked to absorb the energy of the earth and wind, he replied. How do you know that? I asked. Have you seen her naked? Carlos laughed uneasily. No. Don Juan told me. She is like a cousin to his line. Although, as I said, she really belongs with the Noel Julian's party. Why didn't she go with them when they left the world? She wasn't ready. She still wanted to do things in the world, I suppose. We checked into a motel and I spent the rest of the night in a fitful sleep. I felt that there was a horde of people in the room. If I opened my eyes quickly, I could see some of them standing next to my bed, for they couldn't vanish fast enough, and I could certainly hear them whispering. Don Juan was there, and 2 other men, all 3 of them were wearing suits. I sensed their presence and their bulk, but I could not make out their faces, although I thought one of them was the man Catalina had called her protector. At one point in my sleep, I was curled up on my left side, shivering like a dog from the cold. One of the men was poking me with a walking stick to see if I would awake. I felt and could see and hear what they were doing, but I could not move. I decided to feign sleep so I could eavesdrop on what they were saying, for I knew they were whispering about me. She's still stuck on what happened in high school, Don Juan said, annoyed. She can't stop indulging, another one said. Idiot, the man that was poking me said. That's what a Catholic upbringing will do. There is no end to her self-pity. It wasn't as though she gave herself to Father O'Brien. In her mind she did, someone said in a pathetic tone that made everyone laugh. I must have made some sort of movement, because someone asked, do you suppose she can hear us? I wouldn't put it past Taisha, Don Juan replied. She's pretty sneaky. Let's talk to her, maybe we can pour some sense into her. Then they started talking to me and telling me things, what to do to straighten out my life, how important it was to let go of the past and not cling to memories, and things about the recapitulation, which they said was a never-ending process. I sensed their strength and fairness and I felt safe in their presence. Don Juan was so indifferent and non-judgmental that I was relieved. I knew that if someone so noble didn't give a hoot about what I was or did, that it couldn't be that bad. They must be right, I was only indulging. They told me many things, about myself and about Carlos and of things to come, but I knew I would not be able to remember even a fraction of what they had said, and then someone did something that I would remember always. He began to sing a song. It was a song about saying goodbye and leaving memories behind, even the happy ones that made our hearts laugh. The song was so strange, because it recounted specific moments I had lived. It was as if that song was tailor-made for my life and the words described what I was feeling in the deepest part of me. Of course, I began to cry, not because it was a sad song, but because it was about me. It was a song of making peace with one's heart and with lost youth. It was a song of liberation, beautiful and strong, for it captured the essence of the moment. It summed up the temporariness of life. Listening to it, I felt purged and a deep sense of gratitude and love welled up for those who were helping me for no reason at all. That simple tune had reached places no words could have touched. The next morning I remembered what had happened in the room the night before. I wanted to write down everything so that I could later make sense out of it, and follow the advice they had given me, but all I could recapture was the essence of some of the things they told me, and, of course, the song which was still in my mind weaving its melodic spell. After breakfast, we drove to the center of town, parked the car near the plaza and walked to the marketplace. This person has a stall in the market where he sells medicinal herbs, Carlos said. I think it's in this aisle if I'm not mistaken. We walked past the rows of fruit vendors and a stand that sold poultry. Chickens were hanging upside down with their heads chopped off and blood was dripping into a pan below. I became queasy. It was not a pleasant sight to see so soon after breakfast. Carlos made some inquiries as to whether the man we were looking for was there that day. A stocky woman with a red ribbon braided into her 2 long plaits pointed to a stand at the end of the row. It was more than a stand, it was almost a small consultation room, portioned off by plywood and curtains. There was a sign on the curtain, saying the doctor is out. The curer will be back shortly, said a thin gaunt youth who was the curer's assistant. He led us behind the curtain and asked me to sit down on a crate. A hot breeze came through the opening of the fabric, making the windowless quarters even stuffier. The cement floor was swept clean and there was an altar with wilted flowers and a statue of the Virgin and some drooping candles. A trunk was the only bulky piece in the area, other than the crates and a chair. On it the curer had laid out his paraphernalia. Stacked against one wall were dried herbs tied together with pieces of red yarn. I didn't recognize any of the herbs, except for the angelica which I had gone to find in a stream bed with Don Juan. Next to the dried herbs was a granite mortar and pestle for grinding medicines to a powder. A row of neatly labeled jars with different powdered herbs, others in roots form, and still others in leaves, lined the wall. I shifted my position on the Pepsi-Cola crate, or rather leaned over to watch the flickering flame of the candles that the assistant had lit on the shrine. My legs itched madly and it was all I could do to keep from scratching them. Carlos had bought me a pair of white cotton mittens to wear so that if I did scratch, I would not draw blood and scar my legs. I took the mittens from my pocket and put them on just in case I had a fit of itching I could not control. I looked like I had white cat's paws. "I'll go see if I can find the cure," Carlos said. I insisted that he stay with me and not wander off like he did at Dona Catalina's house. As we discussed this, the curtain opened and a stooped woman supporting herself on a crooked cane stepped into the inner room. It was all she could do to walk. The assistant greeted her warmly and helped her to the sole chair that Carlos had vacated. "Is she the cure?" I asked Carlos in dismay. Carlos shook his head. "I don't think so. She must be one of his patients." But the assistant introduced her to us as the curer's wife. She kept raving about her husband's powers, saying that he had cured her son's shoulder which he had dislocated while digging an irrigation ditch. "Why doesn't he cure her?" I whispered to Carlos. "She seems to be on her last leg." The old woman smacked her lips and looked me up and down in disapproval. I sensed she distinctly disliked Americans with their soft, cushioned ways. I wasn't about to antagonize anyone after the experience with Dona Catalina, so I said "Buenos dias" and smiled as graciously as I could. She nodded and said "Buenos dias," but did not smile. The curer must be ancient if that is his wife, I thought. Just then, a sprite man, perhaps in his late 40s, entered through the curtain. He was tall for a Mexican, lean, and he exuded a sort of wiry vitality. He had a pointed, well-trimmed beard giving me the impression of a Spanish gentleman on leave from his hacienda, and like the Spaniards, his skin was light. His eyes were friendly and he had well-marked laugh lines around his eyes and mouth giving him a mischievous appearance. He was dressed in charcoal trousers and a white tunic-like shirt with embroidery down the front that, with a little imagination, could pass for a doctor's smock. Carlos, the curer, Don Vicente, and his assistant chatted amicably in Spanish for a while as his wife, who looked more like his mother or even his grandmother, looked on in silence. Then the curer ceremoniously bowed and formally asked us permission to begin practicing his healing art. He was such a gentleman that I instinctively trusted him. His assistant had told us earlier, while his wife was informing us of his prowess, that he could diagnose illness by evaluating the color and shape of a person's energy that surrounds his body. The curer started by staring at me as if assessing the state of my energy. I was worried about what he might see, especially after the clash with La Catalina. I would have hidden all the bad things if I could, including the foreign luminous worms, but how could one hide what was already invisible? The curer became foggy-eyed and a bit groggy, and he seemed to be looking right through me, so there was no place to hide. I didn't like the way he was shaking his head in dismay. After an uneasy interval, he opened his eyes wider and with a frown whispered something to Carlos in Spanish. "He believes it is a case of bewitchment," said Carlos. "Witchcraft." I knew it. But he hasn't even looked at the flea bites yet. I began to roll up my pant legs. The curor glanced at the red swollen bites and nodded as he repeated what he had said before, embrujamiento. Now he's certain it's witchcraft, Carlos said. The old woman in the corner nodded in agreement. But doesn't witchcraft have to be done by an enemy? I asked. I don't have any enemies in Mexico, except maybe for Catalina, but I had the bites before I had the run-in with her. So I know she didn't cause them. He thinks a jealous woman put the hex on you, said Carlos. I don't know any jealous women, I said, except for myself. I couldn't help thinking. Don Vicente examined the bites carefully, then took 2 white candles and ran them sideways up and down along my calves. He periodically shook the candles in the air as if to cast off the poison that the candles had attracted to them. Then he got a flask of yellowish liquid from the shrine, which he said was holy water, and sprinkled it on my legs. I cringed as if I were Satan himself, for I remembered Clara's story about urinating in the holy water founts in the church. I was certain that the liquid was the curor's own urine. Then the assistant took from the top of the chest a rattle with a long handle and gave it to the curor, who shook it vigorously all around my body. With eyes closed, Don Vicente hummed a monotonous chant as he kept shaking the rattle as if to ward off evil spirits. The sound of the rattle made me remember the girl whom I had seen in the Yaqui store, the day we had bought our hats and the Piscola masks. I saw again the look of contempt the girl had given me while I was sitting in the front seat of the car, but I had already gotten bit. How could she have caused it? I was thinking of the possibilities of illnesses caused by the evil eye, when Don Vicente interrupted my thoughts. Someone wants you to be as miserable as can be, he said. They may not have caused the bites, but they are certainly keeping them from healing. I wondered if Don Vicente's sinister diagnosis was correct. I had heard witchcraft discussed in my anthropology courses, but I had always thought that curses and the evil eye were concepts primitive people used to explain the world of cause and effect because they were somehow lacking in rationality or logical thought. Could someone's ill feelings really affect another person physically? After meeting La Catalina, I was certain of it. I caught myself. It was all too easy to blame others for one's own carelessness or ill fortune. Was my discomfort really something a jealous woman had wished upon me, or was it something I had brought upon myself? To see cause and effect on a supernatural plane, which could not be refuted, seemed to me an easy way to explain anything. I decided that the fleas had bitten me simply because my legs were there and uncovered. Yet the more I thought of the other people sitting in the same room, some wearing skirts with their legs also uncovered, I realized none of them had gotten bit. They were exposed to the same dirt floor, the same fleas, and it was true, the fleas had descended on me with a particular vengeance. What can I do about it? I asked, concerned. I hoped I would not have to kill a chicken or drink the blood of a goat or something of that nature. Don Vicente put down the rattle and searched through his trunk. He brought out an amulet on a string made of a small seed that looked strangely like an eye. He said I needed to wear it around my neck for 9 days, then the swelling and itching would be gone. The amulet called Eye of the Deer would counteract the force of the venom sent by the evil wisher, whom he said I had had contact with. The curor also gave me a holy card of St. George, slaying a dragon, which I was to place under my pillow while I slept. I put the holy card in my pocket and rolled down my pant legs. I decided to follow Don Vicente's instructions to the letter, even though I knew that the dragon slayer had not been a real saint at all, because according to the Catholic Church, St. George had never officially existed and neither had dragons. I realized that what was superstition in one culture was reality in another. Besides, what did I know about the supernatural world and its ramifications? I was trapped in ordinary life thinking of myself, with no hope of escaping, unless something drastic happened. We stepped out of the curtained-off area, which had been a sanctuary apart from the world, and entered the hustle and bustle of the marketplace. Don Vicente addressed Carlos in private in friendly tones. From time to time he glanced at me and chuckled. I wondered if he was telling him more about the evil eye and what to do to counteract it. His wife had followed us through the curtain and was slowly walking away, stopping to browse at several of the stalls. I noticed then something strange. She was no longer stooped over, and she had lost her limp and had abandoned her cane. From where I stood, she seemed like a young woman with an exquisitely straight back. I wanted to follow her around the marketplace to see what she was up to and how she had accomplished her remarkable metamorphosis, but Carlos came up to me and said it was time to go. I thanked Don Vicente and we left. What did the curer say to you? I asked as we stopped to buy some short stubby bananas at a stall outside the main market. Carlos hesitated for a moment, then said, Don Vicente thinks you're a bit crazy and that's why you're so susceptible to witchcraft. What makes him think that? I asked. He could tell from his seeing that your energy field is erratic. Something in you was hopping all over the place. How could he tell? He could see it in your eyes. Carlos peered at my eyes as if to see if what Don Vicente had said was true. He also said that if you don't do something about your indulging soon, your health will be impaired. Then it will be difficult to cure you. Well, if it's a question of internal balance, I said. I'm a hopeless case. I just saw his wife walk away without a trace of a limp, and her back was completely straight. She wasn't even using her cane. What? I said, his wife, when she walked down the aisle, wasn't limping. And she wasn't stooped at all. I think you're beginning to see things, Carlos said with a nervous laugh. Either that, or Don Vicente is right. Someone has bewitched you.